Well, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to have you here. I'm Harriette Cole. I am a senior fellow with Encore.org. Encore is a social change organization that brings older and younger change makers together to solve problems, bridge divides, and create a better future for everyone. I am an author, an editor, and a storytelling coach. Today's event, we're so excited about talking about co-generational activism. And we are today doing something very, very special. Today's event is designed to introduce the work of a new organization, Third Act. It's a new initiative which organizes people who are over the age of 60 to work on climate and racial justice. As founder Bill McKibben puts it, we back up the great work of younger people and make good trouble of our own. Our intention this evening is for you to leave with ideas for how you can get more involved in these issues. So it's all about activism, not just us talking, but everybody gathered. We want today's engagement to be interactive as well. So just as you're writing in the chat now, if you have a question, rather than putting it in the chat, what we would like for you to do is to pose your questions in the Q&A box. That'll make certain that we don't miss any of your questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. They are, starting with Pennie Opal Plant. Pennie is a signatory on the Indigenous Women of the Americas Defending Mother Earth Treaty Compact of 2015. She's also co-founder of Idle No More, SF Bay, and Movement Rights. Pennie has been educating, organizing, and speaking on behalf of Mother Earth and the sacred system of life for more than 40 years. Katie Eder is the co-founder and climate strategy coordinator at Future Coalition. And since launching in fall of 2018, Future Coalition has been organizing young people around a variety of issues, including climate change, voting, and gun violence prevention. Katie is the youngest person on the 2019 Forbes 30 Under 30 Law and Policy list. Jerome Foster Ii, who is not here yet, but hopefully will be joining us soon, is an American climate justice activist and voting rights advocate. He happens to be the youngest ever White House advisor in United States history, serving on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. He's one of the major organizers of Fridays for Future Washington, holding weekly climate strikes at the front gates of the White House for more than 57 weeks. He also serves as executive director of 1 Million of Us, an international youth advocacy and voting rights organization. And we are so honored today to have Bill McKibben. He is an author of, I think, 20 books, educator and environmentalist. He's the founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 to work on climate change, racial equity, and protection of democracy. He founded the first global grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, and serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont. So welcome, welcome everyone. We are very interested today talking about working across generations, working with one another. And essentially that's part of why Third Act came to be. So I would love you, Bill, to tell us, why did you think there was a need for Third Act?
Well, first of all, what an extraordinary pleasure to be here with everybody. And Harriette, thank you so much. And everybody at Encore, this is exciting. Third Act comes about in part because I've spent much of my life, like Pennie, organizing. And it sort of became clear to a bunch of us that young people were doing their job. They were remarkable organizing going on. I mean, everybody knows about Greta Thunberg, but there's Katie and Jerome and 10,000 other Greta Thunbergs spread across the planet, and they've got 10 million followers. And that's terrific, really fantastic. But we cannot take the worst problems that the world faces and assign them to 19-year-olds for the homework. That's not right, it's not fair, and it's not going to work. There's 70, 80 million of us now over the age of 60 in this country. We all vote like crazy. Most of the money ended up in our bank accounts. 70% of the money in the country belongs to boomers or the silent generation, compared to about 5% for millennials. So if we're going to make the changes that we have to make to safeguard the planet, to safeguard democracy, we're going to need older people engaged. And here's the other half. I always heard my whole life, people get more conservative as they get older, and so on and so forth. I don't think we can let that be true. And I don't think, especially for these generations, that it needs to be true. Those of us over the age of 60, when we were in our first act, back when we were Katie's age, we got to watch or participate in really profound cultural, social, political transformations. We kind of know how to do this. Now, it's true that our second act might have been taken as a whole tiny bit more tied up with consumerism than with citizenship, perhaps.
Tiny bit.
But that's, water under the bridge. Now we emerge in our third act with lots of skills, lots of resources, often some grandkids, some real interest in different than Katie's generation, maybe because they're building the world they're going to have to live on, but we want to shape the world that we're going to leave behind. And those two things mesh up beautifully, I think.
Thank you. Katie, as a young person who started very young in this space of protecting the environment, what got you as a child to be interested in preserving the environment?
Well, thank you for the question, Harriet, and for convening this amazing panel. It's such an honor to be talking with Bill and Pennie. Both are just absolutely incredible organizers. And I'm sure I'm going to talk a lot about youth organizing and the power of youth on this call, but we would not be able to do any of what we do without the path that generations before us have paved. And so as important it is in this moment, we're going to ask you to follow us and follow the youth and listen and support young people. We would not be here without all of you, and we hold that very core to our organizing. So I'm really excited for this conversation. As for myself, so I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was born and raised very much involved in the Jewish community in Milwaukee, and so that was a part of my childhood that was really affected my values growing up. And in Judaism, there's a phrase called tikkun olam, which basically means to repair the world. And the idea is that we as people all have an obligation to other people and to the planet to help repair harm and to, just as Bill was saying, leave the world better than we found it. And so that was something that was very much weaved into my childhood, even after sort of transitioning out of being so involved in the Jewish community. And then when I was in 6th grade, I took a creative writing class in school, and it was called an inconvenient, I just totally spoiled it, but it was called Environmental Detectives. And we read a lot of things. One of them, we read, of course, Bill McKibben, and I got introduced to him as a young 6th grader. And then we also read An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. And that to me at the time was such a, it was so clearly laid out, this existential threat to humanity. And it was such a eye-opener for me because I had never previously really understood there to be an issue that spanned so many communities and so many people, and that could affect so much beyond, the sort of bubble and town that I lived in. And at the time, being, 11, 12 years old, I remember just thinking and feeling like, people must not know about climate change, or they would do something about it. And I just not understanding how we weren't taking action. We had, back then it was global warming, more commonly known as, and it felt so just baffling to me that we weren't doing anything, knowing what we knew. And so as a young 6th grader, I thought, okay, what I need to do is help other young people understand this problem so young people can do something about it. And so I had a meeting with my principal of my school and sat him down and asked him if on Earth Day we could have an assembly where students presented on global warming and on climate change. And he looked at me and sort of very confused as to why I had just sort of like marched myself down to his office and sat down until he would take a meeting with me, but he eventually agreed. And so on Earth Day, when I was in 6th grade, we had an assembly for all of the students in our elementary school and presented all about climate change and reduce, reuse, and recycle. And, at the time, things that were maybe more so individual action than a lot of the societal and system action we're looking to now. We gave everyone a reusable straw way before it was like the Starbucks trend. And so that, was for me, the really kind of, I got that bug, I got that organizing bug and that sense of, this feels like the issue of our generation. I remember going home after taking that class at school and telling my dad, I'm going to be an environmental activist when I grow up. And my dad said to me, an activist isn't a real job. And if I really wanted to do anything, I should be an engineer or a lawyer. And so as the Jewish father that he is. And so I then wanted to be an environmental engineer for a very long time until I reached high school. And there was a shooting in Parkland, Florida, that killed 17 young people. And there had this huge moment of uprising of our generation, of Generation Z, to say, we are no longer going to sit by and watch as our futures are destroyed before our eyes. And this huge upswell of organizing around gun violence prevention that I believe is, one of the inspirations, and it is what we know is one of the inspirations behind the climate strikes and the energy that Generation Z has now shown around the climate justice movement as well. And so that for me has been kind of my origin story, has always been in climate. But now I can say for real, I actually am an environmental activist, which is exciting. And my dad now says, I learned a long time ago not to doubt when you tell me you're going to do things. So I'm sure I'll share more, but that's just a little bit of a snippet of how I got started.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think we're all energized behind your enthusiasm. And it just proves that no matter what your age, when the fire gets lit, you can move forward. So we appreciate so much that you have. Pennie, you do a lot of work in the Indigenous space. And, we know historically this country has not been so kind to Indigenous people. And and our land is often in greatest peril in Indigenous communities. And you've devoted so many years to focusing on how to uplift. Can you talk about in your origin story, what triggered that work and where is that work headed today?
Yes, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. It's so exciting to be with all of you on the panel, and all of you literally around the world. How exciting that we have such an amazing group of folks here with us. So I'm Yaqui on my mom's side and undocumented Choctaw and Cherokee and European on my dad's side. And I grew up under the shadow of the Chevron refinery in Richmond, San Pablo, California. And at a very young age, I just felt like something wasn't right. This wasn't how the world was supposed to be. And I was asking those questions to my poor parents who had me when they were 18 and 19 years old, barely older than I was, really, when you look at the ages of how long we get to be here. And just so much poverty and so much unfairness in the world. And so I sat with that, through my teenage years and tried to understand where things went so wrong in our human family. And then I went to see Helen Caldicott, who was still is a very important anti-nuclear activist. And I was married at the time. I took my first husband. I'm on my third husband. I kept doing it till I got it right. And took my parents. I insisted that they go with me. And I started crying during her presentation. And I wasn't sobbing, but big tears started coming out of my eyes. And that went on for 4 days. I went to work that way. I ate that way. And as we were leaving the cathedral where she was speaking, I looked at my parents and I said, and my husband, and I said, how can you be walking around like the world is normal? Because the world will never be normal again, because we have the capacity to destroy all life on Mother Earth's belly. How can anything be normal again? And so that started my road into doing all that I could to ensure that the sacred system of life continued. And I just started there and never stopped. And now, I'm in my 60s, and I'm happy to say that I'm one of the co-founders of Idle No More SF Bay. And one of our premises is that we have no human enemy. Our enemies are the thought forms that created separation, colonization, and capitalism. Because when you look at the climate crisis and the pollution crisis and many of the things that are critically injuring what we all need to simply survive, you can see that those threads go back to, at least for us, that's what they go back to. And at some point, we forgot how to be human beings as an integral part of the sacred system of life, not separate, not better or worse than any other being, and honestly, one of the newer natural life forms. And so one of the things in Idle No More that we've done is in 2018, we had an intergenerational project that lasted an entire year. So the Idle No More, our group, was started by a group of Indigenous grandmothers who'd been praying together since 2007. And we had a lot of young people, and still do it as part of the group. And so we spent a whole year downloading all of our wisdom and knowledge and organizing skills into this group of younger people. And then we stepped back. And so they're the ones with guidance from the grandmothers that are moving all of that forward. Another thing that I did with friends was to create the Society of Fearless Grandmothers. So Idle No More has done a whole lot of work in the streets, shutting down meetings where the policymakers weren't doing, were basically letting us die, and being very vocal and fearless. And while that's very much fun, it really didn't do anything to change anything. So, but anyway, with all these young people in the streets, the Society of Fearless Grandmothers trained women of grandmother age, they didn't have to be literal grandmothers, to blockade the streets so that the actions could happen. And we trained grandmother age women to be police liaison with the full understanding what a bad media presentation that would be, to have, police officers that were much younger than us, like our nieces and nephews or our own kids' age, to be brutal to a bunch of old ladies. So that has spun a lot of different groups around the country, and we just got one of a message from somebody in South Africa who was inspired by it. And we only have a Facebook page, but if you go to the Society of Fearless Grandmothers, our whole training is on there, and anybody and anywhere in the world can watch it and dive deep into the information and start your own Fearless Grandmothers group. So
that's
here
so
I am.
exciting, Pennie. And I just want to dig a little deeper, thinking about, like, we are now at the time of year when many families are getting together. People are literally going to see their grandmothers and elders in their family. And often, while they're loving connections that we have with family, it often just is on the surface. They're hugs and kisses. They're probably extra hugs because we didn't see each other last year due to COVID, but not often deeper conversations or a call to action. And I'm curious as to what you might recommend to people who are with us right now when they go to be with their families, and grandmothers and grandfathers are seeing their grandchildren, and as you say, even if they don't have them, family members across the generations, what can that conversation be like across the turkey or whatever we might be eating that might spark this co-generational excitement around protecting the environment?
Well, I think given what's been happening across the country with the drought and the fires and, you know, the smoke that went from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, that could be a very easy place to start. You know, I mean, we're all experiencing the impacts of climate disruption right now. There's so many more tornadoes, and it's, you know, I think that would be a good place to start because it's the weather. And depending on the involvement of the person, you know, wanting to have this conversation in their families, just talking about that and being concerned and, you know, sharing some information about what that person knows about how this is, what is increasing these problems in the world, and then asking people what they think. Like, what do you think about this? Like, what are we going to do? I mean, especially as young people, just saying, what are we going to do to make sure that my grandchildren are going to be able to live in a sustainable world? Like, I'm really worried. Or as a grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or aunt or uncle saying, you know, I'm really worried about my kids or the babies that were just born in our family. What are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that they have a world that is sustainable? I mean, the older people, we have enjoyed so much. You know, we have been blessed with so much in our lifetimes. And for the most part of our lives, we didn't realize how much that was taking away from future generations. So I think especially as older people, we have a responsibility to say, yes, I benefited from so much, especially living here in the United States. And it's my job, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to ensure that the babies survive. I mean, that's something I say quite frequently. We have to make sure that all the babies survive, and not just the human babies, but what we're taking down is the sacred system of life itself.
That's right.
Beings that have evolved together for millions of years before we even got here. And in a way, that's what hurts me the most.
That's important points, many of them. Katie, I want to go back to you for a moment for the other side of this gaze. Again, just when we're around the table, because I want people to be able to take away some concrete ideas. And this is a perfect time that many of us are going to be together with family and loved ones. And in some families, there is still that idea that kids should be seen and not heard. In some families, especially people who are your age, it's like, okay, can I get up and just go and hang with the young people? And I'll sit with you for a minute, unless they're you and they're total activists. How do you recommend, from your perspective, that you inspire these conversations toward action with the multiple generations? You know, there's so many generations that are often at that proverbial table.
It's a great question. And I think I definitely echo what Pennie has said. And it's really about posing the question, I think, and is welcoming people in and inviting people into the conversation. I think, Harriette, as you framed it, you know, as you first sort of introduced this question of there's this surface level, sort of surface communication that happens amongst families. And I think amongst people that have any kind of divide, you know, and generational being a big one. And so I think grounding whatever you're doing, whatever you're talking about, however you're, you know, whatever you're talking about, when it comes to issues of climate and sort of other key issues of current events, really grounding it in your relationship. And I think that is for myself a key philosophy behind how I believe intergenerational organizing and intergenerational relationships overall. You know, it's just absolute of key importance that it's based off of a relationship first and foremost, because if you don't have that layer of trust, if you don't have that layer of mutual respect, I think it's even more challenging to try to talk about issues that are often really quite personal and really quite scary for people. I know within my family, you know, there's a subset of my family that wants to talk on and on about, you know, the climate crisis and the potential degradation of our democracy and, you know, these systems of oppression that are sort of keep coming back up and again. And then there's another part of my family that says, oh, you know, this is family time. We shouldn't be talking about such heavy issues, and sort of doesn't want to engage in those conversations because they are big and they are scary and they're really, really overwhelming. I think, though, that really asking people to say, hey, can we sit for a limited amount of time and really just listen to each other, really ask and listen. Don't speak to try to get your point across or try to convince them of a certain point. Just start with, you know, how do you feel about this? Where are you on the sort of spectrum of both understanding, grappling with, educating yourself around this issue? And then you can get to that action piece after you talk about, okay, how does this affect your daily life? I know for me, for a lot of my peers at school who are not as sort of entrenched in the climate crisis as I am, you know, it's something that they don't want to think about. They don't want to, because it is sort of this cognitive dissonance to always be in school and thinking about your future and thinking about what you want to be when you grow up and working really hard to get good grades so you can do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then to kind of have this looming climate crisis over you that's saying, well, will any of it really matter in 10 years? Will any of it really matter in 30 years? And we really don't know. But I think the best antidote to that kind of feeling of just paralysis and environmental paralysis is action, and is saying we can do something about it. It's not on you, it's not on any one of us, it can't be, but as a collective, if we work together, we can do something. And I think the family unit and the family community, just like any other unit of relationship or unit of community, has a unique ability to say, I want to create a safe, comfortable space for us to be vulnerable with how we feel about this, first and foremost, and then talk about how can we support each other, how can we lean on each other, so that burden feels a little bit smaller and we have more room to say, what can I do? How can I use a few minutes every day to contribute to action, to contribute to the collective movement? And I think then you can really start talking about those concrete things that maybe even you can do together, but are things that are more so action oriented and thinking about, you know, how you're using your personal time and energy and capacity.
Very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Bill, I want to pivot now to another topic that is, I know, important to Third Act and to all of us right now. We've been in the space of racial reckoning for the latest version of racial reckoning since June of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, and the whole world started paying attention in a different way. And you talk about climate change, racial equity as being intertwined. And I'd like for you to explain what you mean by that, and how do we carry forward this notion of racial justice and equity in this bigger story of what's going on in the environment?
So one of the ways to think about this, Harriette, is to think about the issues that are kind of generational for our time, the things that in our lifetimes we thought that we'd begun to take really effective action on, and now we're watching slip away. So one of them was the environment. You know, we were around for the first Earth Day in 1970, and people thought the air was getting cleaner and the water was getting cleaner and we were on the right path. But then it turned out that in fact we had this much deeper crisis around climate change that was overwhelming all of that, and that we have to do something big about fast. The same with, you know, I think that if I think about my lifetime, I think the most important thing that Congress might have done in my lifetime was pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And think of the people who died to let that happen, who gave their whole lives to let that happen. And now to watch it just being eroded away, you know, trying to watch people try and make it harder for people to vote, not easier. That's painful, not just to everybody, it should be to everybody, but it should be particularly painful to people who were there when it was going the other way, when we were making those steps. it's so hard to watch that backsliding, but it's so important for us to be able to raise our voice. And I'll give you one quick example here. You see the nice logo, the Third Act logo. It's really beautiful. Go to thirdact.org and check out that. Well, the lettering for that comes from a young African-American typographer. And what he did was he went and looked at those, and you've seen these pictures, the signs from the March on Washington in 1963, and the lettering on those placards that people were carrying as they heard Dr. King give his I Have a Dream speech. And he took that lettering and turned it into a typeface. And to me, that kind of symbolizes the way that we have to keep these movements going, keep these through lines pushing. And we have to do it. We have to do it fast because we're running out of time on these questions. We know that the climate crisis is overwhelming us. And I think also there are a lot of us, maybe especially older people, who wake up in the middle of the night with a certain amount of dread about our democracy too, with the feeling that things that we kind of took for granted, or we can't take for granted anymore. That, past January 6th, just the whole idea that we were going to have peaceful transfers of power in our societies are up for grabs. So time for us to say, no, this is not the world that we envisioned, and it's not the world we want to leave behind, so we can come together to work on it. And I'll just quickly finish by saying the most fun is when we get to do it together. So Katie's group in October was rounding up young people all over America to take on the banks that are funding climate change. JP Morgan Chase has given $250 billion to the fossil fuel industry to keep building pipelines, even though the scientists tell us, no more, we can't do any more of that. So they were getting ready to protest outside those Chase banks. And they said, you know what, it would actually help if we had some older people come along too, because bankers know whose money is in their vaults. And that would, and I cannot tell you how much fun it was to be out there supporting. A little bit of it was kind of grim humor. I confess, somebody showed up in Boston where I was with a big placard that said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels," which I much appreciated. But there we are. That's the kind of unity that's going to be required now.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because you address the fossil fuel crisis a lot in your work and have over the years. And I'm so glad, Katie, you've taken up that baton too. This reminds me so much of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and where people were up in arms for years against apartheid and very little action was being taken until the agitation was against businesses that were investing in South Africa. And when the divestiture movement began, suddenly, there was a shift. And this feels very similar to me in that way. So I'm wondering, A, do you feel that there's a similarity there? And B, that ended up being a revolutionary change. Do you truly envision that there can be a revolutionary change, like in 5 years, in 10 years, not 30? Because I know a lot of the friction between younger and more mature people in this movement is many of the more mature people are saying, well, 30 years from now, here's what's going to happen. And young folks are saying, no, it needs to happen right now. So Katie, why don't you start, and Bill, you follow.
That's an excellent question. I'll start by saying that we see the work that we're doing around banks as a continuation, as a carrying of the torch from the student fossil-free divestment movement, and that is students on college campuses advocating and lobbying for their universities to divest from fossil fuels. And now, I wish I had this number off the top of my head. I want to say it's 11 trillion. Is that right? Bill is the
40 trillion.
40 trillion, I'm so wrong, is the new number that they just recently announced just a couple of months ago. That is total that university students have successfully gotten divested, and others have successfully divested so far from fossil fuels. And that movement was no question inspired by students who were advocating for university divestment from around the apartheid. And that, you know, is just another example of how intersected these movements are, that we are constantly building off of each other's blocks, and that, you know, it's not just about one issue. And I think that's something that young people understand so intuitively and so intrinsically, that this idea of intersectional movements, it's not just something that we do to, say, oh yeah, we're all working together, oh yeah, we're collaborating. It is absolutely necessary that we get outside of our own little bubbles, and not just in the present day moment look to each other and say, how are we showing up for racial justice? How are we showing up for voting rights? How are we showing up for gun violence prevention? But also looking to the past and saying, what have movements succeeded on before? Where have they failed? Where have they succeeded? And how can we take that inspiration? And that's so much of what now the youth climate movement is doing, as we're targeting JP Morgan Chase and other finance institutions, is we're pulling from all of these past movements and saying, you know, what's worked really well is when young people say, I have a personal stake. During the divestment movement was, I have a personal stake in the university. Now it's, I have a personal stake in the bank that I'm going to put my money in for the rest of my life. And so how do I leverage that? How do I leverage my unique position to affect the most change? And that can be true of anyone, no matter their age, of saying, you know, where do I have unique ties? Where is my money? Where am I putting my time and energy? And is that institution aligned with my values around climate, around racial justice, around democracy, around a whole host of other issues? Your money, just like your vote, that is your voice in this society, in this time in so-called America. And so I think that is we keep seeing it coming up from movement to movement, because that works. And that's just, we have to lean into that more and more, of just saying, we're not just we are looking forward and we're going forward, but we have to bring the past with us to make sure that, we're building on all of the work and all of the time and the thought that has been put into movements that have come before.
Thank you, Katie. Bill, please.
So true, Harriette. When we started the divestment campaign around fossil fuels, it was my friend Naomi Klein and I kind of put out the big call in 2012. And we had both been active in the anti-apartheid movement when we'd been on campus 25 years earlier, and that was what sort of got us going. And the first person that we called to sort of say, is this okay, was Desmond Tutu, the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa, who had won the Nobel Prize much for his work in that divestment campaign originally. He said, yes, climate change is the human rights issue of our time, just as apartheid was a generation ago. So do this. And it's a perfect example of this intergenerational cooperation, because some of the work has been done on universities by students, Harvard and Oxford and University of California and University of Michigan, and dozens of others have divested from fossil fuel. But you know who's really divesting, where the huge money is coming from now, is pension funds, people's retirement funds, all, New York City, Quebec, Holland, Massachusetts, Maine, on and on and on. People are saying, we do not want our retirement funds invested in companies that are making sure there won't be a planet worth retiring on, And that is a perfect example of that kind of intergenerational work. And one of the things that we're going to be pushing really hard at Third Act going forward. And as Katie says, now increasingly the onus is on these banks and asset managers who keep delivering money to the fossil fuel industry. And again, it's a place where older people have a huge role to play, because it's mostly our money.
Indeed. In a moment, we're going to go to some of the questions. But before we do that, Pennie, I want to go back to you. You shared with us that you recently moved to the Mojave Desert, at a beautiful location. And also in watching some of your videos and listening to you, you say that you can see a chevron plant. You see the chevron plant. And talk about that juxtaposition of really being so close to nature, when there aren't a gazillion buildings and distractions of the modern world, so to speak, and being in the desert and recognizing the peril right there at your doorstep.
So I grew up near the Chevron refinery where before I moved to the Mojave. And when I lived still there in the East Bay, I could actually see the Chevron refinery every day from my house. I lived 6 miles east on a hill. And so I would document all of the flaring and the poisoning of our community, and post it like crazy on Twitter and social media platforms and tag the news, because many times nobody knew. And the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Board would only send an investigator out if 3 or more people called. So since I've left, there's been other people that have started to take up that role that I was playing. And being here in the desert is beautiful. I mean, we've only lived here for 2 months. We moved into a 400 square foot tiny home. You saw my cat Carlos, and it's, I don't feel a juxtaposition, because right behind where I lived was Wildcat Canyon. So I had access, there were deer, and my husband saw a bobcat. So there wasn't really that big of a split between, all of our non-human relatives and my family. And the desert is very powerful, and the mountain here is very, very powerful. It's a sacred mountain that I won't even go to until I have permission from the local tribe, which, I mean, that is the proper way to be around sacred sites. You ask for permission from the people whose territory you're living on. I live in Kauai territory. I don't know if that answered your question or not. I'm so sorry.
It did, especially in a clarifying way. I misunderstood where the Chevron plant was. So I'm glad that it's not in the Mojave Desert. That's a great thing. I did ask Marcy to queue up some questions, but I see one that is appropriate, I think, at this moment, in relation to this. I think there's some consciousness around fossil fuels, and someone writes, is Third Act open to working with retired oil industry people who care deeply about the environment and want to learn and contribute to addressing the issue? I think that's, like, that feels like reformed, awakened. Can you speak to that, Bill?
Absolutely. Nothing can be more exciting. Look, the whole point of doing this kind of work is to bring people in who might have thought one way at one point, and then in experiences of their lives push them in a different direction. If someone was an oil engineer in their life, when they started out 40 years ago, we didn't even know about the climate crisis. A few scientists understood the possibility of climate change, but nobody else knew about it. So it's not on them, but they're precisely the people now who understand why we need to change. And they're often engineers, especially people who understand just how quickly we can change. I mean, one of the things that's really working in our favor right now, Harriette, is that the price of renewable energy, sun power, wind power, batteries to store them, has dropped like a rock. It's 90% less than it was, when Katie was in junior high. So we're at the point where we can make these transformations if we can overcome the incredible vested interest that wants to end inertia, that wants to keep us locked in the status quo. That's one of the reasons why this work is at one level both so exciting and so frustrating right now, because we know what we need to do. We know where we need to be. We just have to figure out how to get there. And the key to getting there is having as many people as possible pushing in the right direction.
I love that answer, because we want to be inclusive. And that was one of the things that Pennie talked about, really embracing everyone. And when we embrace everyone and don't reject folks, then there's space for growth and maturity. And that's what we need in order to heal this world. Pennie, there's someone who says, I appreciate what Pennie is saying about the conversation with our grandchildren. We also recently heard about the increase in mental health issues for the younger generation. So I wonder how to phrase this conversation so that it is empowering for younger people and not frightening.
So becoming active is the antidote to depression, to climate depression. That is my experience. And that is my experience with young people, that when anyone is experiencing depression and overwhelm from the situation that we're in, which is critical, it's absolutely critical. The way out of that dark hole is to join other people. And I'm the type of person who actually has stood on a sidewalk by myself holding a sign with my messaging on it all by myself, and done it enough times so that people eventually joined me in my life. And I know that that takes a lot of courage, but this time that we live in is requiring us to muster up as much courage as we possibly can. And people will come. If there's no one in the area that's doing this work, then it's up to you to start it. I mean, and we can all do it. I'm not a special person. None of us are special people. We're people that want to do something to make a sustainable world for all the babies, right? And so, you know, when you shift your attention just a little bit into what is the most important thing I can do with my life, regardless of how old you are, but especially young people, because you're going to be here a hell of a lot longer than we are, then do the thing that is required of you to do. And if you're asking the question, what am I meant to do right now around climate? You know, the answer will come. I have asked a lot of questions in my life, and the answers do come. It might take a while, but they will come. The right people will show up. It will fall into place, but just asking the question and being open and doing the thing that you know you need to do that is terrifying. I mean, I've done it many, many times.
Pennie, you mentioned a number of things. One, if you don't see it happening, do it yourself. And I think that is for people who are incredibly proactive leaders. I mean, that's a certain kind of person. And then there are other folks who want to participate in something that already exists. And there's someone who wrote saying, I'm of grandmother age, but not a grandmother, would love to protect youth in the streets. Can you tell us, what is that website where folks can go if they want to get involved in that project?
It's the Society of Fearless Grandmothers, and it only has a Facebook page.
Got it. You did say that. The Society of Fearless Grandmothers? Excellent. Thank you. So Bill, I want to go to you. There are lots of, let me just say, there are lots of questions. There are lots of people who want to be connected to all of you. And so I'll say this to everyone. If you have a website or email address that you'd like to share with folks, certainly your website, but if there's an info ad or a way that folks can reach you without shutting down your email, please put that in the chat box, because folks want to know how to get in touch with you. Bill, there's a question. Will Third Act be organizing people by zip code, by geography? For people who want to act locally, they want to know what they can do.
Absolutely. And, you know, Pennie was saying a moment ago that she's not a special person, but of course she is.
Yes.
And there's very few of us who are just like, okay, I'm going to go stand on the street corner by myself with a sign. Okay. So we have to build organizations that make it easier for the rest of us to take those kind of actions. And that's precisely why we start things like Third Act. And yes, we'll be organizing people by geography, so that, because there's lots of these issues have both a national and a local angle to them. And we'll be organizing people, and this goes to the earlier question, by what they spent their lives doing. So there's already third act engineers forming, and third act people of faith and business people and so on, because with those long careers comes extraordinary expertise that can be brought to bear on things. A big group of lifetime people who've spent their lifetime working in engineering brings both knowledge and credibility when they speak in public about things, and people will take it seriously. So being the kind of vehicle for that sort of work is really important, because so many of us have the impulse to do something, we want to do something, but that question of how exactly to get involved is really hard. And because the rest of us are not quite as proactive as Katie or Pennie, doesn't mean that we can't be just as effective by the time we kind of link up arms with each other.
And I'm so glad you said that, because remember, we want folks to leave this and to be able to take action. And that is so important in order to move this movement forward. Bill, you should know that there are many, many people who are engaged with us right now who have elder activism networks already. And people are interested in learning how they can partner up with Third Act. And I think it's worth noting that you just had your official launch this week, just moments ago. And you just, and this amazing idea was birthed in September. So it's a baby. Third Act is a baby. And there are lots of folks who want to participate in growing this baby and working together with you. So what can they do?
Well, just come in and sign up. Thirdact.org is an easy website to navigate, and then we'll start sending you work to do and finding out from you what work you want to do. And it's not replacing other work that people are already doing. People are doing all kinds of good things, and that's terrific. It's another on-ramp in and a way for people to feel comfortable. And you're right, a lot of it's about skill building and things. So I'm going to do a workshop for people in January about how to write letters to the editor and op-eds. I'm going to call it How to Be an Effective Crank, because, I've spent a lot of my life writing op-ed pieces and writing letters to the editor and so on and so forth. Those are the kind of skills that we can quickly spread and share, make ourselves more powerful.
Excellent. Katie, as we look to the future and pay attention to what's been happening of late, especially the isolation from COVID for so long. Someone has written in here about depression and the suicide escalating during this period. I have an 18-year-old. She has told me, the substance abuse is spiked, suicide has spiked, or the potential for, what do you do, and those who are looking to the future to engage our youth and help heal those who are lost and who are in the darkness right now, and we want to lead them into the light?
It's such an important question, and it's such a reality that we're dealing with. And within even the youth climate movement, it's made up of so many young people who are, oftentimes misfits. We call ourselves marching band kids, like the kids that are sort of the odd ones out. That's a lot of, queer young people and BIPOC young people and young people who live in rural or otherwise isolated areas. And so, that feeling of sense of isolation and loneliness can be even more profound. And I think that the best answer happens to, or I certainly don't have the answer, but my best, suggestion and is the same as to what is the first step of organizing, and that is community, and finding people to connect with and to process with and to heal with, and finding that in every aspect of what you're doing. I know for myself, I was able to build community in my organizing, but then lacked it, in other places. And so that was an area that I really needed to invest my time into to make sure that I felt supported in sort all pieces of my life. And so I think it's first and foremost finding and identifying people that you can connect with, and that can be in real life or it can be virtual, but really sort of having folks that you can celebrate the victories with and process the failures with. And then the other thing that I'll say, which I think is so important and is something that especially young people, and especially young people who are inclined to organize, is the same young people who are inclined to go, 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 go. And I think one of the other sort of pieces and advice I have is that, you know, part of what we talk about when we're talking about addressing the climate crisis is a transformational change, is a system-wide change. And that means that our practices and the way that we operate also needs to change. We cannot operate in the same way that people did to put us in the problem that we are. And that is this, you know, often attitude and behavior within sort of the capitalist structure we live in, that is this go, 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 do, perform, perform, perform. And I think for people that are inclined to say, we want to heal the world, we want to do good and organize, that translates into, we must organize all the time. And if we're not organizing, we have to actively feeling guilty that we're not doing anything, and never enjoys our day offs. But something that my team has been working on a lot this year is that rest is resistance, right? Rest is a revolutionary act to say, in a world that doesn't allow us to rest, that does not want us to rest, saying, I'm going to create a boundary, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to take care of myself, you know, put my oxygen mask on before helping the person next to us. That is so revolutionary. And in this just technology forcing us to constantly move, it is just, it's even more important now than ever, no matter our age, certainly for young people, that we have to take those breaks, we have to take those beats, and then we have to find that community that will hold us accountable to do that, and hold us accountable to take care of ourselves, and when we can't, and when we need someone to lean on, that we have the people there that can be that for us.
I feel chills. I don't know about the rest of you. Rest is resistance, you know, that is so powerful. Can you believe that an hour has occurred? Look at all of the incredible insights, wisdom, enthusiasm, excitement for our planet, for each other, for healing that we've been able to discuss. It is so important for us to work together. And that is what the work of Encore is all about. That is what each of your organizations is all about. We thank you so much for bringing your work, your expertise, your love to this forum. Thank you. We look forward to more connections. I know that all of these people who have gathered to be with us today, look in the chat, they're hungry to connect with you. So in case there's any doubt about there being foot soldiers and leaders who are on the ground ready to heal our planet, they're here. Many of them are here with us right now. Can I get one word from each of you that you would like to leave folks with? I'm saying one word because we're at our hour, but I'm going to start with you, Bill. Give us one word, please.
Together.
All right, Pennie.
Love.
Katie.
Courage.
Courage?
Courage, yes.
Excellent. Together, love, courage. Thank you all so much. It's been an honor to be with you, and blessings to everyone.
Thank you so much, Harriette. This was wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.